I'm working on this 1957 Bolens Ride-a-matic tractor. Last time I got the carburetor off, took it apart, and put it in the carburetor cleaner to soak. And also I fixed the loose exhaust elbow. So now I'm going to get the carburetor out of the can. It looks clean, a little darker color than I expected. That's probably because I left it in there too long. It's been soaking for 5 or 6 days. It's going to need rinsed off, and I shouldn't have put it in this pan with the rest of the parts. So I got to move all this stuff. Well, that's just as free as it could be. The throttle lever is locked up, and the choke lever is locked up. So I'll take it off and clean it, try to get that stuff working again. It worked perfectly. Okay, I'm going to rinse it off and blow it dry. Yeah, this part looks good. I still need to make sure none of the small holes are clogged. The bowl's clean, but it has some pits in the bottom from corrosion. I'm going to clean up the last parts on the wire wheel. To clean these little springs, I put them on a small screwdriver. Put your thumb on the back of the spring and you can move it around while you're cleaning it. I got this new carburetor kit. It says it's made somewhere else there. There's a piece of crud in the hole. I should have taken this out before I soaked it. This seat don't thread in there. I've seen that before. It looks like it's the right size. I think what happens is they machine the end of the thing after they machine the threads. Well, that last operation leaves a burr on the edge, and now you don't have good threads anymore. If you want to make these on an automated machine, you need to do the threads last so they don't get messed up. Here's a threading die. It's a 5/16 24 thread. This one screws in there easy, so that's the right size. I can't even get it started on this one. If you start a die on there crooked, it'll keep cutting crooked, and it'll mess up all the threads. You can see the first thread is a different shape. Since I think the problem's just the first thread there, I'm going to use the thread file. It's a file with teeth on it. It's double-ended with a different thread pitch on each face, so it works on 8 different size threads. I'll be using this face with the 24 on it. This is going to be hard to hold on to while you're filing on it, so I want to use this socket and extension as a handle. The part goes too deep down in the socket there, so I'll space it out with some washers. And then I want a nice solid surface so I can apply some force in a controlled manner. Make sure you're using the face with the right number of teeth on it. Luckily I didn't move totally out of the camera frame. I'm going to have to watch that. You don't want to hold the file at a right angle from the part. If you look at the threads, they're on an angle, and you want to match that angle. You're filing the last thread into shape while letting the existing threads guide the file. Here's some bad camera work again. After the filing, I was able to use the threading die on it, which will put it to the proper size. Now it starts in the hole but gets tight after a few turns. So I'm going to run a tap in the hole to clean out those threads. I start with a regular tapered tap because that'll line up with the existing threads. I blew the chips out of the hole and I want to see if this goes in better. Now it goes in nicely except for the last turn, so I need the threads to go in a bit farther. This is a bottoming tap that I made out of a regular tap. You can buy them or you can make them if you grind the taper off and sharpen the bottom row of teeth. Okay, that's good there. It screws in easily until it touches the washer. Next is the square O-ring. It's an O-ring with a square cross section. The needle goes in the seat there. This thin rubber gasket goes on before the float. Then the float with the new float pin from the kit. Actually, I don't want that thin gasket on there yet. I set the float level without it and put it back in later. Yeah, that's way off with the new parts in there. The float should be parallel with the bowl gasket surface. I'm going to bend the tab on the float. I'll push it down a little right here and see what that does. That's a lot closer. I'm going to push it down a tiny bit more. That's good there. With the float resting on the needle, it's parallel to the gasket surface. So now I'll put the thin gasket back in. Make sure that thin gasket is centered before you pinch it into place with the bowl. When you're done, make sure you can hear the float move around in there. Next is the main needle and spring. Make sure all those little holes are not clogged. There's 4 in the threaded area, 4 near the middle of the needle, and 1 near the tip. Screw it all the way in until it bottoms out finger tight and turn it back out 2 turns. This one don't have a slot, but there's an arrow telling you which way is lean. The idle screw and spring are next. Screw that one all the way in and back out 1 1/4 turns. The governor is behind the carburetor, so I want to put it together first. There should be a little washer on that shaft there. Then the brass bushing goes through the round part and screws in the hole. The brass bushing seats against this cable bracket, so that has to be in there. Make sure the round disc turns easily after the bushing is tight. This one feels like it's rubbing on something. Sometimes this cable bracket gets in the way, and that's what it is. If I hold this bracket back, I can turn it easy. So I need to fix that cable bracket. Yep, it's bent there. You can see where the original bend was. It has to be flat below that. That should work. There's a bend in that part to help line up the cable with the movable disc, but the bend is above that disc. It has to be flat behind the disc. That's good there. I'm blocking the camera here, but also make sure the shaft is free to move. It should go in and out a little bit and be able to rotate easily. The carburetor bolts on these old Kohlers had slots in the top, so you could use a screwdriver. There's no room for a socket. If you use a wrench, you can only turn them a little at a time. Use a screwdriver with a small tip so it can be on more of an angle without binding. And then you gotta switch to the wrench to tighten them properly. I'll put this back on for now. I might take it back off to test the fuel pump. This carburetor arm has a lot of holes in the top. This one here is where the old linkage was. If I push on the linkage, the hole is in line with the shaft, and if I pull, it's way down here. If I use this hole, it's more centered with the shaft like it should be. If I pull, the hole's on this side of the shaft. If I push, the hole's on that side of the shaft. So that would be a better hole to use than the other one, but still it's too close to the shaft. That lever's too short. That gives you less travel and less leverage. If you measure that, the hole's just over a 1/4 inch from the shaft. Here's the type of lever arm that's usually on a Kohler. Normally you use the outer hole here. And that's about 7/8 of an inch. Like 3 times as much as that other one. If you look at that distance on this lever arm, it's past the middle of that big hole, clear over here in that keyhole slot. So I think this carburetor is a more recent model when they used a plastic plug in that hole. If I put my linkage in this outer keyhole, it's the right distance from the shaft. Also, it'll be centered on the shaft. When I push it, it's on that side of the shaft, and when I pull it, it's the same distance on this side of the shaft. This part looks bent here, so I'm going to straighten that out. I want that to be flat across there. I can't make that piece of plastic that should be in there, but I made this from a piece of barn roofing. That little protrusion there is folded over so it's double thickness. When I lay it on there, that protrusion goes down in that hole there and fills up the space. It's also bent down a little bit to fit in that hole and hold it in place. Then I'm going to bend those tabs around the bottom and it'll be clamped on there for good. That should leave me that little hole there for the linkage to work in. I want to make sure everything is mashed flat, and that folded over part is down in the hole there to lock it in place. I'm ready to put the governor arm on, and I'm going to use this new linkage I made. The other one had one end broken off. When I took this apart, this spring was not in the slot on the disc there. So make sure the spring is in the slot when you put it together. I put the linkage wire in the lower of the 2 holes on the governor arm, because that's the way most of them work best for me, so I try that one first. Sometimes the other hole works better. You might have to experiment. Once you get this on there, I like to make sure there's a slight gap behind the arm. I'll use this screwdriver to create a gap back there. I just don't want it rubbing anywhere it doesn't need to. With the spring engaged in that slot properly, the governor arm and that disc back there move together. I'm going to tighten this nut here because I'm getting ready to clamp that in place. what you want to remember is everything is timed together at full throttle. So looking at the shaft, full throttle is in the counterclockwise direction. So I'm going to rotate the shaft counterclockwise with the pliers. Now if I put one wrench on top here and push down with my finger, that forces the arm to the counterclockwise position. And at the same time you're pushing downward on the shaft, holding it in the counterclockwise position. Then you can use your other hand to tighten the nut while both parts are held in place. Now all those parts are in time with each other properly and should be able to flop back and forth with no resistance or binding. Okay, that should be ready to go. That's as far as I'm going this time. Hopefully I can get the throttle cable to work with what I have there. And I haven't checked to see if this engine has a spark yet. Alright, that's it.